Most men waste months trying to understand a woman's personality when one simple question can tell you everything in 30 seconds. Not her beauty, not her past, not her social media, just one question, and especially question number two. Because if you miss that, you miss the truth. Listen carefully. One simple question can expose emotional maturity instantly, because emotional maturity is not something people rehearse or perform on demand. It is something that leaks out naturally when a person is asked to reflect rather than react. Most individuals can appear calm, kind, and understanding when conversations stay light and affirming. Compliments, agreement, and validation are easy spaces to occupy. But the moment a question gently invites accountability, self examination, or discomfort, the emotional depth of a person becomes visible. This is because maturity is rooted in awareness, and awareness requires the ability to sit with uncomfortable truths without defensiveness or denial. When a person is emotionally mature, they don't rush to protect their ego. They pause. That pause itself is revealing. It shows that the person is thinking, not performing. Emotionally immature individuals often respond quickly, not because they are confident, but because they are avoiding reflection. They rely on rehearsed narratives, stories where they are always right, always wronged, always misunderstood. Emotional maturity, on the other hand, allows room for complexity. It accepts that two things can be true at once. That someone can be hurt and still responsible, disappointed and still accountable, loving and still flawed. The power of a simple question lies in the fact that it removes distractions. There is no room to hide behind charm, attractiveness, or humor. The question acts like a mirror, and not everyone is prepared to look into it. Emotionally mature people recognize themselves in that reflection, even when it is uncomfortable. They don't panic when confronted with their own patterns. They don't feel personally attacked by introspection. Instead, they engage with it calmly, understanding that self-awareness is not self-criticism, but self-respect. Defensiveness is often mistaken for strength, when in reality it is a sign of fragility. A person who becomes irritated, dismissive, or sarcastic when asked a reflective question is revealing an inability to tolerate emotional discomfort. This does not mean they are bad or malicious. It means they have not yet developed the internal safety required to examine themselves honestly. Emotional maturity creates that internal safety. It allows someone to admit mistakes without feeling ashamed, to acknowledge weaknesses without feeling diminished, and to recognize growth areas without feeling exposed. A single question also exposes how a person relates to responsibility. Emotionally mature individuals do not externalize all blame. They understand that relationships, conflicts, and failures are rarely one-sided. Their language reflects this understanding. They use words like I noticed, I could have, or I struggled with. This does not mean they take responsibility for things that were not theirs, but that they are capable of differentiating between what they control and what they do not. This clarity is a hallmark of maturity. In contrast, emotionally immature responses often revolve around absolutes. Always, never, everyone, no one. These words create emotional distance and protect the ego from examination. A simple question dismantles these defenses by demanding specificity. It gently asks a person to step out of their emotional autopilot and into conscious awareness. Those who can do this show that they are not ruled by their emotions, but guided by them. Those who cannot reveal that they are still negotiating with their emotions rather than understanding them. Emotional maturity is not about having perfect answers, it is about having honest ones, the willingness to reflect, to pause, to consider one's role, and to speak with nuance is what the question ultimately reveals. It shows whether someone is living from awareness or from reaction, from growth or from repetition, from accountability or from avoidance. Her response reveals accountability versus a victim mindset because the way a person explains their experiences tells you far more than the experiences themselves. Two people can live through the same disappointment, the same heartbreak, even the same injustice, and yet emerge with completely different internal narratives. Accountability is reflected in language that acknowledges personal choice, patterns, and lessons learned. A victim mindset, on the other hand, is reflected in language that frames life as something that merely happens to them, as if they exist without agency inside their own story. When a woman operates from accountability, her response carries ownership even when the situation was painful. She may acknowledge being wronged, but she does not build her identity around being wronged. She understands that taking responsibility does not mean accepting blame for someone else's behavior, but recognizing her own boundaries, decisions, and tolerances. Her words reveal clarity rather than bitterness. She speaks with awareness, not accusation. This mindset shows emotional strength because it requires the courage to examine oneself honestly instead of outsourcing responsibility to circumstances or people. A victim mindset often sounds convincing at first because it is emotionally charged. The tone may be heavy with disappointment, anger, or exhaustion. There is often a pattern of repeated injustice in the story. People always leave, always hurt, always betray. While pain may be real, the absence of self reflection is the key indicator. The narrative becomes fixed. She is always the one things happen to, never the one who chooses, allows, or learns. This mindset keeps a person emotionally stuck because it removes their sense of control. If everything is caused by others, then nothing can be changed from within. Accountability creates emotional freedom. A woman who holds herself accountable understands that reflection is not punishment. It is empowerment. She can say things like, I ignored red flags, or I stayed longer than I should have, without collapsing into shame. This shows that she separates her behavior from her worth. She does not fear self examination because she does not equate mistakes with failure. Instead, mistakes become data, information that helps her grow, adjust, and choose differently next time. In contrast, a victim mindset is often defended aggressively because it feels like survival. Any suggestion of personal responsibility is perceived as blame, even when it is not. This creates emotional rigidity. Growth becomes threatening because growth would require admitting that different choices were possible. The person clings to the narrative not because it is accurate, but because it protects them from confronting unresolved pain or fear. Over time, this mindset attracts the same patterns repeatedly, reinforcing the belief that the world is unfair and people are unreliable. Her response also reveals how she handles power. Accountability reflects an internal locus of control, the belief that while life is unpredictable, her responses are not. This belief creates resilience, stability, and emotional maturity. A victim mindset reflects an external locus of control where happiness, peace, and security depend on others behaving differently. This creates emotional dependency and resentment, even in healthy situations. The person may feel entitled to understanding but resistant to self work. Listening closely to her response allows you to hear whether she sees herself as a participant in her life or merely a passenger. Accountability sounds grounded, balanced, and reflective. A victim mindset sounds repetitive, emotionally heavy, and rigid. The difference is not in how much pain someone has experienced, but in how they have processed it, integrated it, and allowed it to shape their sense of agency. Tone matters more than the words she chooses because tone carries emotional truth long before language does. Words can be carefully selected, filtered, and even rehearsed, but tone is far more difficult to control because it reflects what a person feels beneath the surface. You can hear calmness, defensiveness, resentment, curiosity, or openness not through vocabulary, but through pace, volume, pauses, and emotional weight. Two people can say the exact same sentence, yet communicate entirely different realities depending on the tone behind it. When a woman speaks from emotional security, her tone is steady and unforced. There is no rush to prove a point or defend an image. Even when discussing something sensitive, her voice remains grounded. This signals self regulation, the ability to feel emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Emotional maturity allows someone to speak without emotional leakage, where frustration, bitterness, or fear spill into the conversation unintentionally. A calm tone does not mean a lack of emotion. It means emotion is being processed rather than projected. In contrast, an emotionally reactive tone often reveals inner conflict. Sharpness, sarcasm, exaggerated humor, or sudden shifts in volume indicate unresolved emotions that the person may not even be aware of. These tonal cues often appear before the words themselves turn defensive. Someone may say, I'm fine, but the tone carries tension, irritation, or dismissal. That contradiction between words and tone is revealing because the nervous system speaks faster than the mind can edit. Tone also reveals intention. A reflective tone invites dialogue, while a dismissive tone shuts it down. A curious tone seeks understanding, while a condescending tone seeks control. Even accountability can sound hollow if delivered with bitterness or passive aggression. Likewise, uncertainty can sound emotionally intelligent when expressed with humility and openness. This is why listening deeply matters more than listening literally. Emotional truth is rarely hidden in vocabulary, it is embedded in delivery. Another important aspect of tone is how it handles disagreement. A secure tone does not escalate when challenged. It stays measured even when the topic becomes uncomfortable. This shows emotional containment, the ability to hold tension without turning it into conflict. An insecure tone, however, often escalates quickly. There is impatience, interruption, or an edge of hostility, even when the words remain polite. This mismatch reveals emotional instability more clearly than any direct statement ever could. Tone also exposes self respect. When someone values themselves, their tone reflects dignity. They do not plead, over explain, or shrink their voice to be accepted. Nor do they dominate the conversation to feel powerful. Their tone occupies space naturally. It is neither aggressive nor apologetic. This balance signals emotional grounding and internal validation. A person who lacks this grounding often swings between extremes, either overly soft or unnecessarily sharp, depending on how safe they feel in the moment. The nervous system plays a central role in tone. When someone feels emotionally safe, their tone is regulated. When they feel threatened, misunderstood, or insecure, their tone changes automatically. This is why tone is such an honest indicator. It bypasses intellect and goes straight to emotional conditioning. You can hear past experiences, unresolved wounds, and emotional habits in the way someone speaks, even when they are trying to sound composed. Listening to tone requires presence. It requires paying attention to pauses, size, speed, and subtle emotional shifts. The words may tell you what someone wants you to believe, but the tone tells you what they actually feel, what they are defending, and what they are capable of handling emotionally. The second question exposes entitlement and self awareness because it removes the safety of general statements and forces the conversation inward. General questions allow people to speak about the world, about others, about abstract problems. They can sound intelligent, insightful, even emotionally aware while still avoiding themselves. The second question does the opposite. It shifts the focus from what happens to her to how she participates in what happens. That shift is uncomfortable for anyone who has not developed a strong sense of self awareness. Self aware individuals recognize patterns in their own behavior. When asked to reflect on their role, they don't panic or deflect. They may need a moment, but that moment is thoughtful, not defensive. Their response carries humility rather than self-protection. They understand that acknowledging personal shortcomings does not diminish their value, it strengthens it. This mindset reflects emotional confidence, the ability to see oneself clearly without collapsing into shame or inflating into superiority. Entitlement reveals itself when the question is met with resistance. The tone changes, the energy shifts. There is often surprise, irritation, or disbelief that responsibility is even being suggested. Entitlement operates on the belief that good outcomes are owed and negative outcomes are always someone else's fault. When this belief is challenged, discomfort arises. Instead of reflection, there is justification. Instead of insight, there is dismissal. The question feels unfair, not because it is, but because it threatens a protected self-image. A self-aware response often includes nuance. It acknowledges effort and intention while still recognizing impact. A woman with self-awareness might say she tried her best, but also admit where she avoided difficult conversations, ignored boundaries, or tolerated behavior that later caused resentment. This balance shows emotional literacy. She understands that responsibility does not mean self-blame, but awareness of choice. She sees herself as an active participant in her life, not a passive recipient of circumstances. Entitlement, by contrast, simplifies complex experiences into one-sided narratives. The language becomes absolute. There is little curiosity about personal contribution and no interest in growth. The past is viewed as proof of being right, rather than information to learn from. This mindset keeps a person emotionally stagnant because growth requires the ability to say, I could have done something differently. Without that ability, patterns repeat while accountability is avoided. The second question also reveals how someone handles vulnerability. Self-awareness requires emotional exposure. It means admitting imperfection in real time, without guarantees of validation or understanding. Someone comfortable with this exposure speaks calmly without over-explaining or self-punishing. They are not performing remorse, they are stating awareness. Entitlement avoids vulnerability altogether. It reframes the question, jokes it away, or turns it back on the other person to regain control of the narrative. This question acts as a psychological boundary. It filters out those who expect emotional effort from others but resist it themselves. Self-aware individuals do not feel entitled to perfection from the people in their lives because they do not demand it from themselves. They value growth over comfort, clarity over image, and responsibility over convenience. Entitled individuals, however, often demand understanding without offering introspection. They want empathy without accountability, support without self-work. What makes the second question so revealing is its simplicity. There is no accusation in it, no judgment, no trap. It simply asks for ownership. Those who have it respond with depth. Those who do not reveal their resistance immediately, not through what they say, but through how unwilling they are to look inward. Defensive answers signal unresolved inner conflict because defensiveness is not a conscious strategy. It is an automatic emotional response. It appears when something inside feels threatened, exposed, or destabilized. When a person becomes defensive in response to a simple, reflective question, it suggests that the question has touched an internal tension they have not yet processed. This tension may come from past experiences, unhealed wounds, or beliefs they use to protect themselves from discomfort. Defensiveness is less about the question being asked and more about what the question activates internally. Unresolved inner conflict often lives beneath the surface, disguised as confidence or certainty. A person may appear strong, self-assured, or outspoken, yet become immediately guarded when asked to reflect on their role, emotions, or patterns. This shift is revealing. The mind moves quickly to protect the ego, while the nervous system reacts as if danger is present. Sarcasm, irritation, dismissiveness, or intellectualization are common defenses used to regain emotional control without addressing the underlying discomfort. Defensive responses often involve distortion. The question may be reframed as an attack, even when it is neutral. Responsibility may be interpreted as blame. Curiosity may be perceived as judgment. This misinterpretation is not intentional, it is protective. When someone carries unresolved inner conflict, their emotional system is already on high alert. Any invitation to introspection feels overwhelming because it threatens the fragile balance they have created to function without addressing deeper issues. Another indicator of inner conflict is rigidity. Defensive individuals often cling tightly to their perspective, leaving little room for nuance or alternative viewpoints. Their responses sound absolute and final, not because they are certain, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. Flexibility requires emotional security, the ability to tolerate not knowing, to sit with complexity, and to explore without fear of collapse. When that security is missing, defensiveness becomes the shield that prevents emotional exposure. Defensiveness also interrupts emotional connection. Instead of engaging in dialogue, the person shifts into self-protection. This may look like talking over others, changing the subject, making jokes, or becoming emotionally cold. These behaviors create distance, not because the person wants to disconnect, but because connection feels risky. Unresolved conflict often includes unprocessed pain, disappointment, or betrayal, making openness feel dangerous rather than supportive. It is important to understand that defensiveness is not a moral failure. It is a signal. It points to areas where emotional work has been postponed or avoided. People often develop defensive patterns early in life as survival mechanisms. At one point, these responses may have been necessary. Over time, however, they become outdated, continuing to protect wounds that are no longer actively being threatened. Without awareness, these patterns remain automatic and self-reinforcing. A person who has resolved much of their inner conflict still experiences discomfort, but they do not need to defend against it. They can listen without preparing a counter argument. They can consider feedback without collapsing or attacking. Their responses are slower, more measured, and more open. This does not mean they agree with everything, but that disagreement does not threaten their sense of self. Defensive answers reveal where emotional energy is being spent, maintaining internal stability rather than pursuing growth. They show where reflection feels unsafe and where self-honesty has been replaced with self-protection. The presence of defensiveness is an invitation to look deeper, not at the words being spoken, but at the emotional tension driving them. The right response shows long-term relationship potential because sustainable relationships are built on emotional capacity, not attraction or chemistry. Initial connection can be created through charm, shared interests, or physical appeal, but longevity requires something deeper. The ability to communicate honestly, reflect inwardly, and regulate emotions under pressure. A person's response to a reflective or uncomfortable question offers a glimpse into how they will handle conflict, disappointment, and growth over time. Long-term potential is revealed through emotional consistency. The right response is not perfect or polished. It is grounded and sincere. It shows a willingness to engage rather than escape. When someone can speak thoughtfully about themselves without becoming defensive, dismissive, or emotionally overwhelmed, it signals readiness for partnership rather than performance. This kind of response reflects emotional endurance, the ability to stay present even when the conversation touches sensitive areas. Accountability is a core ingredient of long-term connection. A person who can acknowledge their own patterns demonstrates that they are capable of learning and adjusting. Relationships inevitably surface flaws and blind spots. Someone who already recognizes theirs will not be shocked or destabilized when challenges arise. They will be more likely to repair rather than withdraw, to listen rather than blame, and to evolve rather than repeat destructive cycles. This capacity makes growth possible within the relationship rather than outside of it. The right response also reveals respect for emotional process. Instead of rushing to justify themselves or minimize past mistakes, the person allows space for honesty. They understand that vulnerability is not weakness, but transparency. This shows an ability to build trust slowly and authentically. Trust is not created by reassurance alone. It is created when actions and responses consistently align over time. A thoughtful response indicates that alignment is possible. Emotional regulation plays a significant role in long-term compatibility. The right response does not escalate tension or turn introspection into conflict. Even when discomfort is present, the individual remains composed. This suggests they can handle disagreement without emotional volatility. In long-term relationships, stresses accumulate: work pressure, financial concerns, family dynamics. Someone who can regulate their emotions in a simple conversation is more likely to handle complex challenges without emotional collapse. Another indicator of long-term potential is openness to feedback. The right response reflects curiosity rather than defensiveness. It suggests that the person sees relationships as a space for mutual learning, not a battleground for control or validation. They are willing to hear how their actions affect others and consider making changes. This flexibility prevents stagnation and resentment, which are common causes of long-term relational breakdown.